verdict on the death. Phil Bales reports.
Just by that side.
A page-3 girl and a fictional East End villain were the opening actors in a curious performance outside Maidstone Jail. Reggie Kray, in mourning following the death of Ronnie Kray, his twin brother, last week, called a press conference. Unable to attend in person, Reggie Kray had invited Debbie Ashby and John Altman to speak on his behalf. They've joined the band of celebrities calling for Reggie Kray to be freed.
When you compare what people get these days, running people over on a zebra crossing and they get 3 years, you know.
John? Yeah. The celebrities had never met the twins, who were renowned for their smart looks and sharp suits, a style shared today by twins who dramatically upstaged the celebrities and became the stars of the prison visit. The 24-year-old Wadnam twins, George and Andrew. The big mystery was, who were they?
We're friends, we're family.
The twins emerged to report that Reggie Kray said the funeral would be after the inquest. He was clearly unaware the coroner had already conducted it. But when Ronnie Kray is buried at Chingford Mount Cemetery in Essex, close to his mother Violet, whom he is said to have adored, his brother will be there.
He's definitely going to Ron's funeral.
Got permission from the governor?
He has, yes.
One man who won't shed tears on that day is Lennie Hamilton. He claims Ronnie Kray tortured him with a red-hot poker.
And he told me to open my eyes. So as I opened my eyes, he penetrated my left eye. That's what blinded me in my left eye. And he was going to burn my eyes out. Until someone shouted out, I don't know who it was, they said, no, Ron, not that. And I think it brought him round a bit, like, you know.
Our reporter Phil Bales has been following today's events. Phil, can you explain the actions of the coroner?
No, I'm at a complete loss on this one, Alistair. All day we've been under the impression that the inquest hadn't actually taken place yet. Certainly the relatives and friends are of the opinion that, you know, it was yet to happen. We're talking about the East Berkshire coroner, Robert Wilson here, who held the inquest in his own house, read himself 3 reports, and then faxed a verdict of death from natural causes over to his own office. As far as I know, this is unprecedented, and one coroner has even suggested that it might actually be illegal.
So if people are unhappy, if members of the family are unhappy, is there anything they can do? Is there any kind of appeal or recourse?
Well, I don't think so. A burial certificate has now been released. They'll be unhappy. I'm sure they'll be complaining, but they can now go ahead with the funeral.
All right, Phil, thank you very much indeed.
The tragedy of police...
Brutal gangland boss. For a few minutes, Reggie Kray, temporarily released from prison, had time for his own thoughts, surrounded by family and friends. For many of those outside the church, Ronnie Kray's crimes have been forgotten.
We're safer living in them days with them about than what you are now. And it's a load of rubbish. They terrorised the East End. Didn't terrorise me.
They was harmless. Only you trouble amongst their own, that was all.
After the service, there was absolute pandemonium as the cortege set off once again. Thousands followed, bringing the East End to a halt as the procession travelled a few miles to the cemetery where his mother and father are buried. There, even more had gathered in staggering numbers. Finally, the body of Ronnie Kray, who died of heart failure aged 61, was buried beside his family, bringing to an end the evil partnership with his twin brother Reggie, who maintains to the last that they have no regrets. It's clear there's still a remarkable amount of support for the Kray twins here in this part of East London. And certainly for some elements of society, they will always remain heroes. For most people, though, they were and will always be vicious criminals and ultimately murderers. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News in the East End of London.
Day. Ronnie Kray's coffin was carried on a horse-drawn hearse through the streets he once ruled with his brother Reggie. His final wish was to be buried in the plot next to his mother.
It was the East End send-off that Ronnie Kray planned in his prison cell and requested before his death. From early morning, security men hired by the Kray family guarded the funeral parlour in Bethnal Green, where the procession would begin. Among the floral tributes to the former gangster and convicted killer, this from his twin Reggie, and a wreath from the actress Barbara Windsor. Reggie Kray appeared handcuffed to a prison officer as the cortege prepared to move off. The funeral route took Ronnie Kray's body along streets the Kray twins used to rule with their own brand of terror and protection rackets. there were large crowds, although most were curious onlookers, and not all agreed with the theatrical style of the funeral.
I think it's disgusting, really. He's obviously a local hero. There's a lot of people around here with suits in that I wouldn't have expected to see with suits on. I don't think it's right myself.
The coffin was carried along Valence Road, where the Krays used to live. The Kray family's terraced house has long been demolished, and it's unlikely the gangster would recognise the East End of today. At St Matthew's Church, Reggie Kray was released from handcuffs for the funeral service. The Kray family defended the spectacular funeral, saying people should not forget that Ronnie Kray was mentally ill when he committed his crimes.
I've always said, not making excuses, it's known, doctors will tell you, but the one thing I would love people to remember, who say bad things, you know, remember he had an illness, and if it wasn't for that, he would have been a different person.
The Kray family were determined that nothing should overshadow today, but once Ronnie Kray has been buried, they'll redouble efforts to win the early release of his twin brother. Dozens of supporters chanted, "Let him out," as Reggie Kray left the church, back in handcuffs. From Bethnal Green, a journey across East London to Chingford, and the cemetery where members of the Kray family are buried. Reggie Kray watched his brother buried alongside his mother and father before being taken back to Maidstone jail to continue his life sentence. Paul Davis, ITN, East London.
His twin brother Reggie was allowed out of jail to attend the service at Bethnal Green. Thousands of people lined the streets to watch the funeral procession.
Ronnie Kray had wanted a traditional East End funeral. His family and friends made sure his wishes were respected down to the last detail, the extravagance of the occasion only adding to the Krays' mythology. For all the evidence of their violent past, there are still those who maintain the twins preyed only on their own, extorting money from other villains and conducting vicious gangland vendettas. Questioned about his murderous past, Ronnie Kray would simply say, "We never killed any members of the public." Whatever the reality, EastEnders turned out in their thousands to see his coffin pass by, many cheering and applauding a procession that stretched right across Bethnal Green as limousines followed the hearse to the church. Among a mass of flowers, a tribute from his twin brother Reggie, "To the other half of me." Having been allowed out of prison to attend the funeral, Reggie's arrival at the church was loudly cheered. Many in the East End think his sentence, to serve not less than 30 years, is too long, and they now want him released. The twins' older brother Charlie helped carry the coffin into church, along with pallbearers from the London Manors, once engaged in bitter rivalry with the Krays. During the service, held behind closed doors, the mourners sang the hymn, "Fight the Good Fight," and listened to a recording of one of Ronnie's favourite songs, "I Did It My Way." In life, Ronnie Kray revelled in his dubious status as a gangland celebrity. The style of his departure would have been very much to his liking. Peter Gould, BBC News, Bethnal Green.
Been quite astonishing. Vast crowds lining the streets. Police who once hunted the men halting all traffic to allow the huge funeral procession to pass.
All this for a convicted gangland killer. Ronnie's twin brother Reggie, allowed out of prison for only the third time in 27 years, was himself greeted like a returning hero. Inside the church, he had this to say to London Tonight.
Well, they all have friends and supporters, and they're all nice people, so I'm very pleased to see them today, but I wish it'd been under different circumstances, but it's still nice to have their support, you know.
Well, it's been a day of mixed emotions, expressions of affection for the Kray twins, mingling with memories of the terror they brought to the East End of the 60s. Phil Bales was able to witness all of today's events at close hand.
An old man in a dark suit, handcuffed to a prison officer, let out of jail for only the third time in 27 years. It's Ronnie Kray's funeral, but it's Reggie Kray who's calling the shots. Even from behind bars, he wrote the plot for this old-fashioned East End funeral. A Victorian glass hearse, awash with flowers drawn by 6 black-plumed horses. Reggie's wreath, "To the other half of me." And an honour guard of heavies to watch the coffin overnight and walk alongside the hearse. Reggie Kray's prison car was mobbed as the cortege set off along Bethnal Green Road. It may have been affection, maybe even fear, which brought some of these people out onto the street. In many cases, it was just plain curiosity. Yet even though the Krays carved up the East End in a reign of terror, it was hard to find anyone prepared to condemn them.
You were safer living in them days with them about than what you are now.
They didn't arm us, and they didn't rule the East End with an iron fist.
They was harmless. Only you trouble amongst their own, that was all.
Once again, Ronnie and Reggie Kray were attracting the attentions of the police. But this time, their job was to make sure Reggie Kray's plans went smoothly. Looking down on Valence Road, where both villains were born, where their mother Violet taught them to box, her house is long gone, but a brief stopover was made in her memory. And then to St Matthew's Church in Bethnal Green for the funeral service. Here, more cheers for Kray as he leads the mourners, but a lone voice can be heard shouting murderer. A mob leader mobs as people stop him, trying to shake his hand. The convicted killer even gets a kiss. Much too young for 50s and 60s gang violence and extortion to mean anything to them, but an almost godfatherly greeting from the first handcuffed prisoner they'll have seen away from television. Indeed, embraces in the style of Godfather dominated reunions between men too old and tough for kissing. In a quiet moment, Reggie Kray spoke to London Tonight about his brother and the occasion.
Well, they all have friends and supporters, and they're all nice people, so I'm very pleased to see them today. But I wish it'd been under different circumstances, but it's still nice to have their support, you know. Well, he's a good brother, and he's very loyal, and he's very generous. He had lots of nice ways about him, and I should always remember him with good memories, you know. And I know he's at peace. That's the main thing. You know, he's at peace.
My Way, Ronnie Kray's favourite song. He'd had no regrets about his violent past and no illusions about the consequences. Acceptance too from Reggie Kray and a message read out on his behalf that his brother had a bad side to his character.
Ron had great humour, a vicious temper, was kind and generous. He did it all his way.
Charlie Kray, eldest of the three, said out of violence could come peace. The pallbearers represented past gangland factions coming together from all parts of London.
They're all right, all the guys who are with us today come from north, south, east and west, but they're all respected. And so that stops all these young people thinking bad things, so they can live in peace, I think. That's the best thing to say.
Reggie Kray had said when his twin died, a part of him died too. This was his out in the open again, and Kray teams up with another notorious name from the 60s, Mad Frankie Fraser. 2 hours after the cortege set off, Bethnal Green is still at a standstill. Now Kray's prison Peugeot and the 27 Daimlers head for Chingford Cemetery, a huge convoy travelling at the speed of 6 trotting horses.
Chingford, the final stage of the journey, and this vast crowd has grown even larger. Many are here just for the spectacle. After all, you don't see a funeral like this every day. But most, I suspect, are here for a glimpse, however small, of Reggie Kray.
Reggie Kray was last here with his twin brother for their mother's funeral in 1983. Today, Ronnie Kray was taken to the family plot to be buried alongside her. Before his final farewell to his brother, Kray was allowed a moment at their mother's grave. The Krays did not want this to be a private affair. Even as active gangsters, they loved the limelight. Today, putting on a show is still the name of the game. Ronnie Kray, psychopath and killer, may have been deluded into thinking himself a king in the East End. And it was in that style he was laid to rest. In Chingford, this is Phil Bales for London Tonight.
Well, some of you may condemn those scenes, others applaud them, but the vicar of St Matthew's Church, Father Christopher Bedford, defended the funeral, saying, "I feel that everybody has to be given a Christian burial and commended to God's mercy."
It was all too easy just for today to forget the Kray twins' murderous past, but there are some who can never forget. RAYNER Cornell was just 9 months old when her father was murdered. Christopher Peacock looks at the brutal legacy left by the Krays.
Well, he's a good driver and he's very low.
Watching Reggie Kray's interview on television, the daughter of George Cornell says she will dance on twin brother Ronnie Kray's grave now that he's dead and buried. Cornell, a rival gangster, was shot dead in Whitechapel's Blind Beggar pub by Kray in 1967. RAYNER CORNELL, just a baby when she lost her father, has neither forgiven or forgotten.
I'm over the moon he's dead. The day I found out, I was driving along, and I think people in other cars must have thought I was a raving lunatic because I was really, really jumping and arms in the air and everything.
The Krays were brought up tough by Mother Violet in Bethnal Green, but the spiv-suited twins turned to violence, carving up the East End, maiming and murdering.
All right, fair enough, people say it was like their own, but they were still people who had families.
Kray died from a heart attack after serving 27 years in Broadmoor Hospital for the criminally insane. Not long enough, says Lennie Hamilton, who shed no tears at today's funeral. He fell foul of the Kray firm in the 60s, being tortured and blinded by Ronnie Kray with a red-hot poker.
He turned round again, because he had to get another poker off, because this one was getting a bit colder now, and he got another white-hot one, and I shut my eyes. And he put it to my eyes. I could feel the heat burning me across there, across my eyes, and he told me to open my eyes. So as I opened my eyes, the heat penetrated my left eye. That's what blinded me in my left eye.
Reggie Kray mobbed this afternoon by well-wishers outside the church after his brother's funeral. The crowd, several hundred strong, caught up in the so-called hero worship that masks the truth. A peculiar folklore has grown up around the Krays by a generation fed on a diet of books and films that have glamorized their iron fist hold on the East End.
The whole point of the twins, and particularly Ronnie, was that people were scared stiff of them. This is their stock in trade. Ronnie particularly was a very frightening man. He was a great fighter. He killed people and he cut people up and he went for people. He wasn't a sweet old sugar daddy. And this is what the essence of their power was. People were terrified of them.
Big men in suits, the heavy mob, keeping a high profile at today's funeral, there to guard Kray's coffin. One of them admitting, we're worried. There are a lot of people out there who don't like the Krays.
Oh, they're not bad. But what about if they'd have done it to their families? What would they be saying now? All these do-gooders about the Krays are not bad. They only did it to their own. If they never did it to their own, they wouldn't be in prison today. And they'd have had a lot of friends.
Journey's End at Chingford Cemetery. Ronnie Kray is dead. An old-style funeral for an old-fashioned gangster. But it's unlikely the Kray myth will die with him.
I said that I'd like to dance on his grave, and that is something I'll keep in the back of my mind. But I don't know. I'll have to wait and see.
And what of Reggie Kray? Will he die in prison too, like his twin brother?
He's immaterial to me. He really doesn't bother me in the slightest. He was just a small man behind his psycho brother, in my opinion.
Beyond the grave, nothing is certain. Will Ronnie Kray rest in peace? This is Christopher Peacock for London Tonight.
The end of an astonishing day in the East End of London. Well, tonight, Reggie Kray is back in Maidstone Prison. His victims hope he stays there.
By the gang. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Penny Root.
It was Charlie Kray's funeral, but the man the crowds were here to see was his younger brother, Reggie, the only survivor of the East End's best-known gangster dynasty. In this part of town, the Krays still pack a punch, and the flowers cascaded in all morning, some from the famous, others from the infamous, like Mad Frankie Fraser. This was an old-style send-off, which left some of the East End's newer residents a bit bemused. And among the crowd, which had a distinctly 60s feel to it, were those who'd arrived by accident and those who'd planned the trip.
Well, actually, I was out shopping and didn't even realise it was the day of the funeral.
My family originally come from the East End. My father, John Cassidy, is a very good friend of Mad Frankie Fraser and also Charlie Kray.
The police were out in force, but so too were the official CKF, or Charlie Kray Funeral Stewards. But the best-laid plans were brought briefly to a grinding halt when a small gas explosion closed Bethnal Green Road, and the cortege was delayed getting to church by 20 minutes. NEYIO Pelicci is among those who've known the family for years. He was born above his cafe and regularly served Charlie.
Whenever he came in, everybody used to like to talk to him, and that was quite a nice fellow.
People put him in a different bracket to the twins, don't they? Is that right, do you think?
Well, I suppose people knew him a lot more than the others because he was out more than them. I mean, they'd been in for 30-odd years.
And customers echoed the commonly held view that 30 years is enough.
We want him out.
As Charlie Kray was carried on to his last resting place at Chingford Mount, where Ronnie is buried, Reg Kray and his wife can only wonder if he'll walk the East End again as a free man before his time comes. Penny Root, Newsroom South East in Bethnal Green.
Bethnal Green today as former gangster Reggie Kray made his final journey to be laid to rest alongside brothers Ronnie and Charlie. It was the closing chapter of a life spanning nearly 7 decades, one that will be remembered for an underworld reign of terror unequalled in the capital's history, one that ended 10 days ago in a hotel in Norfolk. This report from Christopher Peacock.
Reggie Kray came home to his manor for the last time. In life as in death, he was still calling the shots, for he'd given the orders, planned his final exit when he knew he was dying from cancer. It was an old-fashioned East End funeral, his coffin borne in a Victorian glass coach by 6 black-plumed horses. An honour guard of heavies was there to escort his passage to the grave. There were faces from the old firm and younger ones too. Lee Randall knew Reggie Kray. He served 5 years in prison with him.
He was a special man, and he's going to be missed, deeply missed.
Seen the film, read the book, think it's good now, really, that he's finally at peace.
It's an end of an era, isn't it? It's you know, the last of the Kray twins.
Reggie Kray's widow, Roberta, led the mourners. Married only 3 years ago in Maidstone prison, she spent 1 month of freedom with him when he was paroled on compassionate grounds. So began the final journey. Reggie Kray free at last after spending 32 years behind bars. Looking down now over Valence Road, where Reggie and Ronnie Kray were born. This is East End heartland, but the crowds are thinner than expected on the ground, nowhere near the estimated 100,000. But the old-timers were there, playing to the crowd. The service was held at St Matthew's Church, the very place where Reggie Kray had made his last public appearance, attending the funeral of his brother, Charlie. That was in April this year. Reggie, already diagnosed with cancer, probably knew he had only months left to live and was non-committal about his release.
It's not informal at this moment in time, but I don't particularly speculate on it because I got more grave than I am now, won't I?
A predictable piece of theatre for a gangster's funeral, Kray's coffin borne out of the church to Frank Sinatra's My Way, a fitting signature tune for a convicted killer who never publicly apologised for his crimes. The final journey to Chingford Mount Cemetery, and Reggie Kray is home, buried in the very same grave as his twin brother Ronnie. They came into the world together, they go out together. But what do youngsters of today who were at this ceremony think of a man they never met, but have only seen portrayed on a film video?
There's criminals, and there's murderers, and that's it really. It was good, it was lovely, loads of people down here. There was nice people and good people, as I think that I saw in the video.
Mixing fact with fiction, always a problem when telling the Kray story. What secrets Reg Kray took to his grave, we do not yet know. There's speculation that he died a millionaire, others will say he was a pauper. But in the months to come, the writers, the filmmakers, the documentary producers will pick over the details. The Kray dynasty is dead, but the name lives on. At Chingford Mount Cemetery, this is Christopher Peacock for London Tonight.
Well, as we saw in Christopher's report, Reggie Kray will be missed by many in the East End of London. But back in the 60s, the Krays ruled that part of town through fear, violence and intimidation. Glenn Campbell looks back at the firm's reign of terror.
The Kray twins, sadistic, violent gangsters to some, generous, sensitive and loyal to others. These 3 people have one thing in common. Each counted the Krays as a personal friend.
old ladies could go out, women could walk the streets. Not like today. I felt safer, you know, when they was about.
When I got weighed off and I got my bird, Reggie was the first person to phone my mother up and say, Mrs. Pole, don't worry, Joe will do it standing on his head.
Raised in the East End during the war, the Kray twins grew up to run one of London's most feared and notorious criminal gangs. By the mid-60s, they owned dozens of pubs and clubs, ran protection rackets, even bought land abroad, pictured here in Nigeria, negotiating a deal. Back home, they mixed with celebrities and aristocracy.
I think the world of criminal world, if you want to call it that, and the world of celebrities are always intermingled. They always have been. The celebrities would seek them out.
By now, the twins had become almost untouchable. After getting off extortion charges in 1965, they appeared on TV claiming they'd been persecuted.
It doesn't leave us broke, but at the same time, it's a lot of money to have to pay out when one is innocent. You know.
But the police were now determined to bring the Krays to justice, and the twins' empire was soon to crumble.
They were really trying to live out a gangster movie. This twin bond linked them into an inevitable chain of murders, which spelled their downfall, but also made the legend into what it is today.
Ronnie was the first brother to commit murder. One afternoon in 1966, he walked into the Blind Beggar pub and shot small-time villain George Cornell dead in front of dozens of lunchtime drinkers. When police arrived, no one would give evidence. Believing they could get away with murder, it was now Reggie's turn. Jack the Hat McVitie had at one time been part of the Kray gang, but he'd fallen out of favour after openly criticising the twins. Lured under false pretences to a party in Hackney, McVitie was oblivious to the fate waiting for him inside. Reggie Kray produced a gun and went to shoot Jack McVitie, but it jammed twice. A fierce struggle followed, but Jack McVitie was hopelessly outnumbered and pinned on the floor. Reggie Kray then stabbed him several times. The murder was to be the beginning of the end of the Krays' criminal enterprises. Rumours of the two killings soon reached police. The twins were arrested hiding in a flat in this tower block. At the Old Bailey in January 1969, Ronnie and Reggie were sentenced to 30 years apiece.
All of us have a responsibility for the Krays and people like them. They admire violence. It's sick, or it may be sick, but this is how society works. Reggie's the last one. Sure, I miss him. Miss any friend. But when he got his 30 years, really, the two of them, it's like they died then.
Dick Turpin, Jack the Ripper, now the Krays, consigned to criminal folklore for a very long time to come. In the East End, this is Glenn Campbell for London Tonight.
Let's move on to the rest of the day.
Surrounded by his own people. A heady taste of the old East End. It was the traditional gangland send-off. Many of the floral tributes were brash, a few were from celebrity friends. The cortege passed the street where the Kray twins were born. This is the area they ruled through fear and violence.
The legend.
But many of those lining the route had conveniently forgotten all that.
Just why there are so many people here today is something of a puzzle. For most, the Krays belong to history. But our dubious fascination with gangsters and their so-called glamour clearly has a strong appeal for some people.
It's because he represented not just the villain, but a kind of also the pair of them were so unique, being twins. There was something rather mythic, rather strange about them, and it also brought people back to an older time.
And now
At St. Matthew's Church, the voice of Frank Sinatra seemed wholly in keeping with the tone of the occasion. Hundreds stood outside, but fewer than the organisers had promised. Reggie Kray's widow, Roberta, shared the gangster's last few weeks after his release from jail on compassionate grounds. Now he